If anybody in Norway defined the German occupation as the German-Norwegian conflict, they would be thrown out of the room. But here we have no problem calling it the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Some even call it a war. Now, speaking of Gaza, I think that's another thing that needs to be made as clear as humanly possible. Israeli attacks on Gaza did not begin in 2008 or 2006 or 2005 or whenever it is that they became, a topic of discussion. Israeli attacks on Gaza began as soon as the Gaza Strip was established. Now, some of you may recall the process of the ethnic cleansing of Palestine of 1948 actually continued until the early 1950s, and then they needed a place to which they could herd all these Palestinian refugees, and a line was drawn in the center of, there was an area in the center of which was the city of Gaza, and that is the Gaza Strip. There's nothing natural about the Gaza Strip as a strip. Israel drew a line and said, this is where we're going to push all these people, and that was it. Overnight, there was a Gaza Strip. And this is the early 1950s, and pretty much as soon as the Gaza Strip was established, again in the early 1950s, Israeli commandos began attacking Gaza Strip. Now, there was nothing there. Poor refugees. But the narrative, the story, what Israelis were told is about these bloodthirsty, vicious Arabs who are now looking at us, wanting to tear us apart because we took their land. And therefore, Israeli commandos, and these are pictures from then, there was a special unit that you may have heard of, Unit 101. Ariel Sharon was the commander of that unit as a young officer. He's in this picture, the kind of chubby-looking guy. And this is them just coming out right after what they called an operation, which is basically a massacre. They would go in and they would just, with what they called punitive operations to punish the people of Gaza. Perhaps somebody came in, they were infiltrators, so you had to punish them for that. Sometimes they'd come in and commit acts of resistance, perhaps kill someone, an Israeli, and so on. So then these guys would go in and commit terrible massacres and come out. So that was in the early 50s. And then it went on, the 50s, through the 60s, through the 70s. Then they started calling them Fedayeen. Then they started calling them terrorists. Today they call them Hamas. There's always a name for this devil that lives in Gaza. And of course, today the attacks look more like this. Actually, this is old. Now they've got the F-35s. The F-35 is the most, cutting-edge flagship warplane. And Israel has them now. Why is Israel so determined to destroy Gaza? What is it about Gaza that is so scary? There has never been a threat to Israel from Gaza. There's never been an army in Gaza. There's never been a tank in Gaza. What is the obsession? Why does Israel constantly attack Gaza? Nobody seriously thinks or believes there is a threat to Israel from Gaza. The other day they reported that the reason for the Israeli attack was that a Qassam rocket was heard being fired into Sderot. So they had to go and look for the rocket. And they had emergency crews looking for where this thing fell. In Gaza, when Israel shoots rockets, you don't have to look for it. It's right there. You can see it. So nobody seriously thinks or believes that there's any threat to Israel from Gaza. There never has been. So what is the obsession? And I think the answer to that is the fact that the existence of this human tragedy points very clearly to the fact that there is no legitimacy to the state of Israel. That a state whose existence created such a humanitarian catastrophe, such a horrible tragedy. And we're not talking about 1,000 or 10,000 or even 50,000. We're talking about 2 million people, 5 minutes away from Israeli cities where everybody's living like this. Perfectly fine. You wouldn't dream of not having water in the tap or electricity when you turn on the light. So there are only two options. One option, open the gates, allow people, the refugees, to return to their homes, pay to rebuild what was destroyed, and create a normal kind of existence. But we can't do that because Israel doesn't want the Arabs back. We don't call them Palestinians, we just say Arabs. In Hebrew, Arabs is kind of demeaning. It's almost like saying nigger. Almost. So we don't want them back. Doing nothing is not an option because people are going to ask questions. So we kill them, bomb them, and blame them for being terrorists. And it works beautifully. It works absolutely beautifully. The world eats it up. Israel is bombing and bombing and bombing, murdering innocent civilians on prime time in one of the most highly visible places on earth. And everybody in America and everybody in Europe talks about Israel defending itself. Self-defense. From what? Self-defense from what? Self-defense. End of story. The Europeans, everybody here in the US, every talking head, every politician, it's self-defense, it's fine. And they're getting away with it. And this is the obsession. And it's not going to end. It is not going to end until the entire issue is resolved. It's not going to end until the entire issue is resolved. And I'll tell you what that means, what I think it means in just a second.